Hi, welcome to the Three Tynes podcast. Today I'm talking to the singer and songwriter Katie Doherty. With her band The Navigators, Katie is a frequent and popular artist appearing at grassroots venues and festivals in the Three Tynes area and beyond. Her music is often described as folk for its focus on storytelling and the use of melodeon and fiddle accompaniment to her piano. But it crosses many genre boundaries and can also be characterised as thoughtful writing and melody that addresses a wide range of subjects. She also writes music for theatre, working with communities to involve individuals in music making and performance. Katie lives on a sheep farm in the North Pennines. Our conversation touches on the wisdom of scheduling a tour during lambing time, problems with categorising music, stage fright, and the challenges that musicians now face trying to make a living from writing and performing their work. The family cat makes an impromptu appearance about halfway through, and I don't know why, because she knows nothing at all about music.
Hey little girl, don't tell us what to do. Oh little girl, nobody's gonna listen to you. How many marching on your way? Look at all the money coming our way. Marching feet just tap the beat, but the beat is ours and we're gonna keep the beat. Keep the beat, keep the beat, we're gonna keep the beat. Then she said, how dare you keep walking away? How dare you keep walking away? Saying that you're doing enough and that the boys are gonna get tougher. How dare you keep walking away? Oh.
So, Katie Doherty, welcome to the Three Tynes podcast. Thank you for agreeing to talk to me.
Thanks for having me.
How would you describe your music?
Oh gosh, hit me with the big one.
Yeah.
I mean, we've worked in the bracket of folk music. I mean, I've been doing this for 20 years now, so we've always been in the bracket of folk music because generally the people that I work with, who I've been in bands with, have come from that tradition. I did a degree in folk music, but I think I have influences from elsewhere, and it's really tricky because I don't like putting things in boxes. I find the specifying what genre it is on Spotify thing really stress-inducing, and in fact we've just finished a tour, a Highlights rural tour, where one of the promoters wrote to Highlights and said, this is not folk music, which is not so, that has happened a few times in my career, but it's difficult because I'm not sure what other genre you would find a melodeon in, or a traditionally played fiddle. I think my voice is quite folky. I sing with my regional accent, and my songs are about people. That to me classifies itself as folk music. So yeah, folk with a little bit of influence from other stuff, I suppose.
We're going to talk about your album Flow later, but now that you've mentioned this difficulty about categorisation, I'd like to bring it up now. When I was listening to that album, as you say, I was initially expecting folk, and I'd heard you live. But as I was listening to it, I thought there are many elements in this. You've got traditional folk instrumentation with a melodeon and a fiddle, as you say, an extensive use of piano, which is not really traditional folk instrument. But then there are plenty of other instruments playing at the same time. And your vocal style is in some songs quite identifiably folk, but in others, the way that you jump between registers is almost like Kate Bush.
Yeah.
And there's one song on there, I'm thinking, this is a power ballad.
Yeah.
I'm sure this would not be out of place in a movie like Frozen.
Yeah.
So you've got quite a diverse collection of styles in one album, haven't you?
Yeah.
Was that a deliberate decision?
No, that's just how it comes out. I think, the way I spend my musical life, I work a lot with children, so I'm very familiar with Disney. I'm a big Disney fan. I think the music, the composers for Disney are pretty genius, actually. And then I spend a lot of time in the theatre, I suppose at the heart of it, it's about the storytelling, and whatever lends itself to tell the story in the way I think it needs to be told, then yeah, it can veer into power ballads sometimes. Yeah.
Well, folk music is about storytelling, isn't
Exactly.
it? That's one of the defining characteristics of folk.
Yeah.
Is telling stories.
Yeah, it's about people and it's about place, and I think that's why we do fit into the category. But yeah, you're absolutely right. But in today's age where we're fortunate enough to be able to listen to any type of music and at any point, then those influences by osmosis, I suppose, are going to sort of creep into the writing. So
yeah, as you say, modern artists are inevitably going to be influenced by a wider range of genres than they used to be. I mean, once upon a time, a folk musician would only be exposed to folk music because there wasn't so much music about.
Yeah, absolutely.
But now you listen to everything, and it's not as if everybody goes around with blinkers on their ears, as it were, if I can mix my
yeah.
But we all like music from different genres, don't we? We might not favour a particular genre, but we like different songs and different genres.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of pressure to stick within a genre as well, especially. I mean, we could talk about Spotify all day, really, couldn't we?
Everybody does.
Yeah, yeah. But I do think it has had such a major impact on music generally, not necessarily a good one. And that pressure, I see it, from younger artists that I've come across or have worked with or mentored even, that pressure to decide on your genre and stick to it and stay in that lane is a definite thing.
Yeah.
Because the likelihood of you getting playlisted, which is the ultimate goal in Spotify, is to get onto a Spotify curated playlist. That's where the money starts coming in. If you don't get that, you're never going to make it with Spotify.
No.
And in order to be able to get onto one of those playlists, you need to have a very specific genre, and you need to be recognisably within that genre.
Yeah.
Yeah. So.
Yeah. It's frustrating, is it? But it seems to me that the public has such a wide choice of what to listen to that unless they're presented with something that they can identify before they listen to it and know what they're going to get, it's very difficult for them to make time for it, isn't it?
Yeah, which is a shame, because that's not necessarily how it worked before, and I do think it does sort of narrow does narrow what you get to listen to, what you might like. You'll never be presented with.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So do you listen to Spotify suggestions? I mean, I assume you listen to Spotify.
I do, and I always think this is a terrible suggestion for me. Why have you suggested this? And, they say if you like this, you'll like this. Well, not necessarily, actually.
Yeah.
It's a lot more nuanced, I think, than Spotify think it is.
Yeah. I don't do it out of principle.
Yeah.
I refuse to listen to their suggestions just out of principle.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah.
So, how did you develop your musical interest into storytelling? Where does that interest come from when you were young?
That's a really good question. I suppose I was always an avid reader, and I was interested in generally creative writing, poetry. So I think I was encouraged to be a musician, but not a professional one. My family are pretty academic. My dad was a doctor, my sister's a GP, my brother's a solicitor, and they're much older than me. So it wasn't sort of the path that they expected me to take to be a professional musician. So I was very much encouraged to try hard in all the other stuff as well. So I was really into English literature. Maybe that's where the storytelling comes from.
Yeah.
I've always been a big fan of theatre and film. So I think that's probably... Yeah. And that was the stuff I was listening to. It wasn't all folk music, but it was songs that told stories that weren't just kind of... I mean, I loved pop music as well, don't get me wrong, but it wasn't kind of the vacuous kind of stuff that doesn't tell you anything. Things like The Beautiful South. I love the way they tell a story. I used to listen to quite a lot of Irish bands. So my family are of Irish heritage, so there's quite a lot of storytelling from that side of things as well. So that's probably where it started, I think.
Yeah. And so that was why you chose to study folk music?
Now this is a bit of a tricky one, because everybody else who did the degree in folk music at Newcastle, of which I was the first year, we were like the kind of guinea pigs, as it were. There was no other degree course of its kind when we started, unless you went to Ireland or Sweden. And the reason I chose it was because it was in Newcastle, so it wasn't too far away from where I grew up in Teesside. I didn't really want to leave my family completely. And also because it was performance-based. And I would have quite liked to do a performing arts degree, but that was a step too far. So this was a proper degree, in inverted commas, from a respected university, and it was a compromise because it was performance-based. And I did have an interest in folk music, but most of the people who were on my year had gone through all of the folkwork summer schools, had done festivals, had gone to their local folk club as children and grown up in that world of sessions and, learning everything by ear, whereas I had trained classically. I did piano, voice and flute as I was growing up and did all of my grades and all of that kind of thing, and then I dabbled in a bit of jazz. So I was never straight down the line, traditional.
A very unlikely candidate. If I was a lecturer on that course, I look at your application and think, well, that's an odd one.
Yeah.
Compared to everybody else.
Yeah, well, we had to audition.
Mm-hmm.
So I did my folkiest stuff, which and I got in, so yeah.
I talked to David Oliver and Vic Gammon. They both taught on that course, didn't they?
They did, yeah. Yeah, Vic came along, I think maybe halfway through. It was a 4-year degree when I did it. And David was around the whole time. Yeah, brilliant lecturers and just general people, actually.
Yeah, nice people.
Nice people, yeah. Vic was pivotal in launching my career. He entered me into a songwriting competition for all universities that had any sort of music degree. And I won it, and that was what gave me the prize, was money to make an album. Yeah.
And can you remember the song? Do you still perform it?
Yeah. It's called Bridges, and that was the title track of my first album. Yeah, we do. We still play it sometimes.
Brilliant.
It's about bridges between people, bridges between places. But yes, the bridge that it refers to is the Tyne Bridge.
How dare you keep walking away, saying that you're doing enough and that the boys are gonna get tougher.
And so where did you go after you got your degree? What happened next?
I stayed in Newcastle and I did a master's in composition and performance. But that was less focused, but my dissertation for that was in traditional song. And then the performance element of it and the composition was me writing music for my first album. So it was with all of the other general music students.
Yeah. And then after that?
Then after that, I became a freelance musician and have been ever since. And I've done all sorts of things. My first big job outside of university was, do you know Ros Rigby? So Ros Rigby was worked with Alistair Anderson in the founding of Folkworks, and then at the time the Sage, as it was then, had opened, and there were lots of new opportunities, and Ros called me one day and said, would you like to go and work on a theatre show with a composer called Howard Goodall? And
Howard Goodall. I've got his book upstairs. Big fan of Howard's. Yeah,
he's amazing. So I said, yeah, great. She didn't specify what the job was necessarily. She said, it's a piece of Shakespeare and you'll be teaching the actors Howard's songs because he's composed the score but he hasn't got time to do the teaching. I said, yeah, great, that sounds amazing. So I went down to London to meet the director, who's, at the time I was 22, 23, I was a little bit green, I'm not going to lie, and I'd read the name Sam West, but I didn't put the two together that it was the Samuel West of Timothy West and Prunella Scales' son.
Oh, I see, right. Yes.
And so when he walked down the street, I was a little bit terrified. And we sat in his living room and he read me the whole of As You Like It.
The whole of it?
The whole of As You Like It. Literally sat for 3 hours. He was like, I'm just going to read you it. Okay. It was amazing. It was absolutely incredible. And then I got to write some music for that, some extra incidental stuff that they needed. I worked with an incredible team. But I didn't actually know what my role was until I arrived in Sheffield for rehearsals. It was opening at the Crucible. And I walked straight into a bus stop with a big poster and it said musical director, Katie Doherty. And I instantly rang my mum and was like, you're not going to believe this. I'm actually the musical director. What am I going to do? And she said, just smile and nod, work out how you're going to do all the stuff afterwards. And that's what I did. And it was total fluke and I completely winged it. But it was an amazing experience and it went quite well. And that was the start of me working with theatre. So. Yeah.
This is a big feather in your cap, isn't it? But at the time you weren't driven to, like many musicians are, write your own music and perform your own music.
I was, and I was doing that alongside.
Right.
I think at the time I was looking for record companies to put the album out. I had made it. It was all finished, so I wanted to license it to somebody. And I was trying to do that alongside, making a living and paying my rent. So I worked in retail. I did the theatre stuff. I worked for an events company. I just was working sort of 24/7 alongside trying to put this album out. And a record company, Catherine Tickell, put me in touch with her record company, Park Records, and they put Bridges out. And I toured it a little bit, but I didn't know how it worked in terms of getting gigs. I didn't have an agent. So we did a few gigs. We launched it at the Sage and it got quite good critical acclaim. But I had already started at that point developing stage fright. And I think that going from being part of university bands that weren't necessarily my name to then performing a whole album that I'd written and it was my name above everything and it was up to me to put the band together and, probably being quite naive at that age, I found, the stage fright got worse at that point. So I sort of, after touring that album a little bit, I took a step back from performing because it got a little bit silly. Yeah.
I don't perform my music because I'm too scared even to try. So I get stage fright even before I leave the front door.
Yeah.
So I imagine that must be very traumatic. But I've heard people talk about it before. And for many musicians, it's not something that they start with, but it develops after that and becomes something that they can't cope with anymore. Mm-hmm. So what do you think it was that triggered it in you?
I think it was that change of going from something... I always loved performing and I got nerves, but they were kind of... I could cope with them. It was the pressure of it being... not only my name, but my songs. Mm-hmm. I suppose you can't, I don't know how you feel about this, but you can't be a songwriter without putting quite a bit of yourself into the songs, and therefore you're basically naked. You're out there on stage and, whatever you say, the audience are going to judge you. That's what they're there to do. And I think I wasn't necessarily prepared for that feeling. And I found that really difficult than being my own songs. If it was other people's songs, it was a different kettle of fish.
Yeah.
But
when I saw you perform in Alston, about 3 or 4 weeks ago, one thing that did strike me was that you were a very accomplished performer. You didn't just sit behind a piano and play continuously. You talked to the audience in between. You got up and stood up there in front of your other musicians in the band. And spoke to the audience face to face, didn't you? And then sang to us. So you've obviously done something to tackle this issue. What was it?
I've done loads of things. I did, I sort of took all the advice that people would give me. Did the Alexander technique. I did meditation.
I'm sorry. Are you all right with
yeah,
cats?
I love cats.
Oh, sorry, carry on. This is a sociable one.
Oh, hello. Hi.
She's made an appearance in several
What's her name?
episodes. Squeak.
Squeak.
And you can tell why, can't you?
Yeah, hello. Oh.
What are you doing? Come on, back to bed. We'll come up here then. Come on.
Oh, she's gorgeous.
Sorry, Karen. Alexander technique.
Alexander technique, yeah, just all the stuff people suggested. I remember actually someone saying, don't talk between the songs.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so I tried that for a bit. That didn't really work.
No.
And then eventually I did some hypnotherapy, and it was singing backing vocals for another band, some really good friends of mine, and they just gradually encouraged me to do a solo, a couple of solos per gig.
Yeah.
And then having, other musicians who I really respect and who are super supportive makes a difference. I find it really difficult to do solo gigs. I really don't enjoy it at all.
Mm-hmm.
I can get through it. There's one time where I wouldn't have been able to. My hands would shake too much to be able to play the keys, and my voice wouldn't come out. But yeah, having Grace and Dave, or some other trusted people around.
Yeah, that's the melodeon player and the fiddle player in the Navigators, isn't it?
Yeah, but the hypnotherapy did help. It definitely helped.
It's interesting, isn't it? I mean, everybody feels this, don't they, when they stand up in front of people and either speaking or singing or doing some kind of performance. But it's an odd thing, isn't it? Because the people are there and they want you to do well.
Yeah.
They're there because they want to see you and listen to your songs.
Yeah.
And yet one feels so, as you said, vulnerable and nervous at the same time, when you couldn't really hope for a better situation to have people listening to your music, could you?
Yeah, it doesn't make any sense really.
No.
And I think, like you say, the question of what triggered it could be any number of things really. I think I have strategies now to avoid it. I like to be just little things, like I need to be at the space with enough time. I generally I try not to chat to the audience before. I have some like exercises that I do to try and calm myself down, make sure I'm warmed up. And I think I feel more able to ask for what I need now, just being older.
Like no brown M&Ms in your rider.
Just more kind of, if you're doing... I always find sound checks really, really stressful because I'm not in control. Well, the sound at Ulston, we do ourselves. But if there's a PA and there's a sound engineer, I find that really stressful because you're not in control. They don't know your music. They don't know how to balance, so they're learning. And I think there was a long time where I didn't feel like I knew enough about what they were doing to be able to ask for what I needed to feel comfortable. Whereas now I know a little bit more about sound. I've educated myself. I've done some sound myself, so I don't feel as bad saying, actually, can you take this particular EQ off of my voice? I don't like it. Or sometimes I found like, sound engineers would say, oh, you don't need any reverb. Yes, but I would like some. Yeah, but you don't need it. And now, then I wouldn't push it.
Yeah.
Now I would say, well, I still would like some, if we have to do something that needs a sound engineer, I'd rather bring someone I know who's done the sound for us before. So all things like that make it much more manageable. Breathe in and out. I can feel her. 1, 2, 3.
Another thing that is often outside an artist's control is the marketing and selling of your work. Now, you mentioned that Park Records published your first album.
Mm-hmm.
How have your dealings with the recording industry been since then?
Well, to be honest, it's changed like this. But I think after we released Bridges, that was 2008, and I think there was a massive shift in the recording industry after that, because then streaming started coming in. People stopped buying. Well, gradually people have stopped buying CDs, but then there was also much more DIY music going on, so you didn't necessarily need a record company, which was great because I found that process with Park when I was really young, not through any fault of theirs necessarily, but it wasn't a pleasant experience. Things like the cover of the album, there was a lot of friction about what would go on the cover and how I would be marketed, and I didn't feel like my opinions were necessarily heard or appreciated. So the next album we released not till 2019, and that was when I formed The Navigators, and that album, and then I released myself, but through a record company. So I licensed it to them, and that record company were a very small outfit based in Germany, actually, because I'd worked with Broom Besums, my friends who were based out in Germany, and they said, well, speak to Neil, he's the record company basically. Yeah. So I released it through him, because then he could do things like get barcodes and make sure everything was in the right way so that it could be distributed to all the places it needed to go. Yeah. And then Flow, I worked with what they call a label services type thing, so not a record company. I released it on my own label, and it's actually distributed by Hudson Records, who are the main sort of folk label in the UK at the moment. But they just distribute it. They don't have any, they don't do any marketing or anything like that. And I pay for marketing separately. So it's expensive. That's
the flip side, isn't it, of having this freedom, is that you don't have the record company doing the marketing for you. It's all down to you.
It is, but it is very expensive. But the thing that with Bridges was, I'd paid for it all, but then to sell those CDs at my gig, I had to buy them off the record company.
Really?
Yeah. And to make a profit, I had to sell them at probably more than, was sort of the going rate at the time. Yeah. I can't remember how much it was, but I think it was extortionate. I felt it was about £7.20 to buy them off of the record companies. Then obviously I had to mark them up quite a bit.
Yeah. That's a high price, isn't it, for a record company to charge? When you think that you can, in the past when there were lots of CDs around, you could pick up CDs for £3 or £4.
Yeah.
If you didn't want the top 20 kind of thing.
Yeah.
That's just a rip-off, isn't
it? Funnily enough, I actually found... They did actually send me a box a couple of years ago. They said, we found a box of these CDs, do you want them? And I said, yeah, and they sent me them. But then a couple of weeks ago, I sold what I thought was my last Bridges CD at a gig. And then somehow I came across online Park Records selling, I think they had 3 copies of Bridges for £3 each. So I was like, well, I'm going to buy them. So I bought them because that was my last copy. So I've now got 3 copies of Bridges, which I could probably sell for more than £3 at a gig. So
now presumably, like many musicians, you sell merch after a gig, and that's a significant source of income.
Yeah, I wouldn't say significant.
Not significant, no.
No. Again, it's the streaming thing. People are not buying CDs. We're lucky in the sort of folk, the folk gig world, in that generally your audiences are a little bit older and still play CDs in their cars. Yeah. So people do buy CDs, but I'm never going to make back the money it costs to make the album. It's just the whole thing's a total loss leader. I don't know how anybody does it if they're not doing other stuff to subsidise it. But I think Flow probably cost about £8,000 to make, and there's absolutely no way I'll make that back.
No.
And not even through doing the gigs either, because to command a decent gig fee, there's not many places. So
No.
post-COVID, everybody went, right, well, we can give you this, because they haven't got the budgets.
Yeah. The music business, in its broadest sense, not just the companies, but the whole thing about performing and making money out of your music is in a mess, isn't it?
Yeah,
It's
really
not sustainable.
No, it's not.
There are reports on an almost regular basis in the press that you read about venues closing, small venues closing because they can't do it, and musicians, now that they can't perform in Europe on a cost-effective basis thanks to Brexit.
Yeah.
It's very difficult, and it's bound to lead to a reduction in the number of performing musicians, isn't it?
I think it will, yeah, I think it almost certainly will, and that, coupled with hardly any music in schools these days.
Yeah, it's another travesty, isn't it? It's another
Yeah.
travesty.
Yeah. But on the bright side, there's we've just done a highlights rural tour. And companies like Highlights are amazing for musicians because you are guaranteed a fee.
Mm-hmm.
So you don't have to take the financial risk, which is super, super stressful. And all the tours that I've done with the Navigators, other than the Highlights ones, I take the financial risk.
Yeah.
But I insist on paying my musicians as close as possible to MU rates, which is not easy. But that usually means that I end up not taking a fee. Whereas the Highlights rural touring is subsidised, it's Arts Council funded, so the promoters don't have to sell the amount of tickets that would cover our fee.
Yeah.
But we still get what we need to be able to do it.
Yeah.
So thank God for outfits like Highlights. Generally, they have really well supported gigs as well.
I've got a model for coping with Spotify that is totally unrealistic, but I think would be a good one.
Go on.
If people would recognise that everybody uses Spotify or Amazon or Apple or whatever, because it's how you want to access music. You want it at your fingertips, don't you?
Yeah.
So let's pay them for using the platform. But also we have to recognise that the artists, unless you're Elton John or Paul McCartney, don't get any money.
Yeah.
So at the same time you have to, or you should, buy the music from the artist through something like Bandcamp.
Yeah.
I mean, this is totally unrealistic, but wouldn't that be the good way of doing it?
Yeah, absolutely.
And then Spotify wouldn't be able to say, oh, we're paying our artists plenty of money, and everybody knows that's a fib.
Yeah.
But that's just pie in the sky, really, isn't it?
Well, yeah, but I mean, I think something will have to shift.
Yeah, I know. We've been saying that for 2 or 3 years now, haven't we?
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a few people campaigning for, lobbying the government to look at streaming, and it's very, very unfair.
Yeah. Exploitative, in fact.
It is exploitative, yeah, it is. And yet we all consume. I listen to Spotify because it's easy.
It's easy. Well, I can remember the days for vinyl and CDs when you would hear of music, somebody would recommend it to you, or you'd hear one track on the radio or something, you think, I like that, I want to know more about that artist.
Yeah.
So you were faced with the choice of going to HMV or whatever, paying £10 or £12 for a CD so that you could hear them, because there was no other way of getting to their music. Whereas the good thing about the streaming platforms is now, if you hear of something that you're interested in, you can go and listen to their album, and then if you're a decent person, you buy their album in some other place, and you can listen to them with a clear conscience. So in the old days, music wasn't accessible because it was, out of people's price range.
But I mean, the record shop thing, I think HMV's sort of slowly coming back in some way, shape or form, but I remember, I don't know if you ever went to Borders.
Borders the bookshop?
Well, it was bookshop, but it was also, the selection of magazines and music. And there was one in a retail park near where I grew up, and they used to have a cafe in there as well. It was probably Starbucks, to be honest.
Mm-hmm.
They just had such a lovely, sociable vibe about them. You'd go in and you could get magazines on anything, and the extent of the music magazines was crazy.
Yeah.
And that was where I came across, things like Songlang's magazine. What was the other one? Was it Womex? I can't remember. Anyway, there was world music magazines. And then what they would do was, like they do in Waterstones, they'll put like a staff favourite album or a staff favourite book, and they would write a little thing about why they liked it. And then they would also do that thing of, if you like Sean Colvin, you'll probably like this. But it was much more, actually, yeah, I probably would. I just think that music is a sociable thing. People like to talk to each other about music, and that sort of setup, that sort of model, they should bring it back. But they all went bust, didn't they? That was credit crunch time, I think.
Yeah. And the internet's transformed everybody's expectations about everything, really.
Yeah, nobody wants to talk to each other.
No. But then, I mean, we all say that, don't we? It's not like it used to be, blah, blah, blah. But then if you get in a room with somebody, like if you go and see a gig and you're sitting next to somebody you don't know, you know, just to be polite, you might open a conversation, and then before you know it, you are talking about something or other.
Yeah.
It might only be the weather or politics, especially politics these days.
Yeah.
Or music. It's as though all our expectations have been changed.
Yeah.
But it's not reality, is it? If we're given the chance, we behave as we naturally would.
Yeah, we're social people.
Yeah. And most people are nice most of the time, aren't they, I think?
Most people, yeah.
Tell me about your band, The Navigators.
So The Navigators are made up of Dave Gray, who plays the melodeon, and I met him through the folk degree, although he was studying quite a lot after me. He's a young pup. And he has the most infectious energy as a musician. I think he's probably the most energetic musician I've ever met in terms of live performance. And he has such a positive vibe that he gives off.
He's a smiley melodeon player. I think I can say that for him. I haven't seen him. Yeah.
He's very smiley. He's amazing at arrangements. We arrange all of the music together. He's got a real sensitivity to the storytelling as well, which you don't find with all musicians, especially instrumentalists. If they're not kind of familiar with song structure, sometimes that's a bit of a battle. Yeah, he's just brilliant. He's a really good friend as well. And then we started off with a different fiddle player, Shona Mooney, who was Scottish Traditional Musician of the Year 1 year. She was fantastic fiddle player, but retrained during COVID to be an audiologist.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so she lives in Glasgow now, and she works as an audiologist. So that was sort of the end of Shona playing with the Navigators. But luckily, Grace Smith came along, who also did the folk degree long after me. She sings, she plays the fiddle, and she does clog dancing. She has a trio in her own right, the Grace Smith Trio. And actually Dave and Grace play in another trio called Cri de Canard, and they play French dance music.
Wow.
And they're out touring at the moment as well. Dave's off to Ethno, which is a bit like Folkworks, but over in Europe.
Yeah.
They do these camps, summer camps, and he works as a mentor and a tutor on those things. So all three of us work with young people and children in music as well.
Yeah. So from what you've just said, and from your description of your work with theatre, being a musician nowadays is not just about standing up and singing your song. There's a lot more to it.
I mean, I think if you're going to make a career out of it, unless you're really lucky, and there are those people who can just do that. I love it that way. I love that I get to do so many other things, and I feel like all of them inform one another in different ways. I definitely couldn't do an office job, I know that. So yeah, I think we wear multiple hats, and especially, you know, the DIY side of music in terms of releasing your own stuff, and like you say, being in charge of your own marketing, doing your own social media, all that type of thing is great that you're in control, but it's a huge amount of work. And you have to be a graphic designer, and you have to be a PR person. You have to be able to write your own press release, sell yourself. Yeah, I mean, I'm my own agent. I have considered over the years having like an alias, like sending emails from some other named person, just so that all the hard negotiations and the no's and the doors slamming in your face, you know,
Yeah.
It's not quite as hard if it doesn't feel like it's you on the front, you know.
Yes, and that is a significant issue, isn't it? All the refusals that you have to put up with.
Yeah, but I think if you're doing other stuff as well, then you know, you can always. It's wrong to say you can always fall back on that because it doesn't feel like that now. It feels like it's all part of the same thing. But yeah, it's to be financially stable, you've got to wear a lot of hats.
Yeah. And how do you manage to do all this and have a family and do all the business side of your career from a remote Pennine farmhouse?
In some ways it's very tricky, and in some ways it's actually easier. Certainly in terms of making the music, I don't have any neighbours. I can make music at any time of the day or night. And not disturb people, which is a massive thing because a lot of my peers live in terraced houses or flats.
They do.
Yeah, and it's really difficult. You've got to be, you know, considerate of other people living around you. So from that point of view, it's easier. The landscape is inspiring. I love being able to look out of the window and see what I see on a daily basis. And then there's the whole other side of things where I am miles away from civilization. You know, if I forget to pick up milk one day, it's a half-hour drive to a shop, an hour round trip to get some milk. Yeah. So it's I have to be really organised. I spend a lot of my life in the car, just generally. I do a lot of my business from the car, you know, phone calls. It's just, I suppose it's like anyone really. It's a balancing act. And there's definite challenges to being so remote, but there's huge privileges as well during COVID. Yeah. Although we were isolated, we felt extremely lucky to have that level of space outside. Before I moved to where I live now, I was in the centre of the city. I was in a flat with someone beneath me, someone above me on either side. Yeah. And there was a lot more convenience about it, but it wasn't necessarily any less or more challenging. It's just different.
And so you can cope at lambing time as well, can you?
Well, you see, I programmed a tour during lambing this year, and we talked about it a lot. And my husband is very laid back, and sort of said it. You know, it'll be absolutely fine. It was absolutely fine, but I don't think I would do it again. We're lucky in that we have lots of childcare nearby. We have plenty of support, which if we didn't have that, it would be a different thing because we'd have to pay for more childcare, which is hugely expensive. But just in terms of the workload and stress, I probably wouldn't. Probably won't do that again.
So what's coming up in the next few months for Katie Doherty and The Navigators?
We are playing a gig in Blanchland actually at the Abbey. They're just starting to try out doing some musical gigs in the Abbey at Blanchland, and that's through Highlights. They're gonna so I'm gonna do a gig on the 15th of June. We're there. Next week I'm down in Lincolnshire for a gig down there in the barn in Baston. And then we are over in Lancashire on the 19th of June at the Willows Folk Club. And that's kind of the end of gigging for the summer. And the rest of the time I'm writing a musical inspired by the life of Josephine Butler, who was a 19th century social reformer born in Northumberland. I've worked with this theatre company who are based in Morpeth, November Club, for a lot of years. And this is kind of a completely new territory for me. Normally I write the music for musicals or for plays or theatre productions. I've never written the story and the book, as they call it as well, so it's the whole shebang. It started off as a podcast, a 20-minute audio musical, which you can find on Spotify.
And what's it called?
It's called Josie, the Indignant Daughter. And hopefully it will be opening at the back end of 2025. Fingers crossed, but that's all funding dependent. And
And is it hard to get funding for that kind of project?
I think it's hard to get funding for arts projects. Just generally, it's harder than it's ever been. There's a smaller pot for more people, so it's very, very difficult. But the Arts Council have funded it thus far, and we've managed to secure funding from various other different pots of money, so fingers crossed we can keep it going. I'm out working with high school students, talking to them about Josephine Butler, and they're very much part of the story as well.
Right.
Because the things that she campaigned for at the time that she was campaigning it was completely unheard of for a woman of her stature to be out protesting and speaking in public. So it's a very interesting subject. It's lovely to be able to involve young people in it. And it's exciting. Yeah. It's exciting.
Sounds brilliant. I look forward to hearing that.
Yeah.
Katie Doherty, thank you very much.
Thank you.
It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, thanks very much.
She is new flowers and fox tracks. She is wind's warning. She's a welcome to the wanderer and those who heed her calling. And when you think of home, you think of her. When you think of home, you think of her. She is pubs and pipes and kippers. She is spookies and sparrows. She is fairy folk and footsteps and all the best of Maras. She is woodland and window. She is heart, song and breathing. She is by the river running and with the swallows leaving. And when you think of home, you think of her. When you think of home, you think of her. When you think of home, you think of her. When you think of home, you think of her. She is salt spray flying. She's a crumbling coastline. She is tidal times and worries on the wind. Oh, borders, walls and decisions. She is hard graft for a living, at the mercy of her weather, your end and your beginning. When you think of home, you think of her. When you think of home, you think of her. She's space and sanctuary, clarity and wonder. And at night she lets the heavens steal the show. She will ask for your devotion in the twitter of a skylark. She will stay with you and sing to you wherever you are going. And when you think of home, you think of her. When you think of home, you think of her. When you think of home, you think of her. When you think of home, you
Thanks for listening to the Three Tynes podcast. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Please subscribe and tell your friends about it.